Fox 5 and Hot 97 present Street Soldiers with Lisa Evers.
I'm so glad you're joining me for this episode of Street Soldiers on NYCHA at a turning point. You know, the roughly 500,000 people living in the nation's largest public housing system have been through years of substandard conditions with little hope of repairs. Now, under the watchful eyes of a federal monitor and new leadership, NYCHA is trying to fix a broken system with new programs. Can residents dare to hope? Mold, lead paint, broken elevators, no heat, hot water, or electricity, rats and roaches. Those are all familiar problems for many NYCHA residents. Most are low-income working families and retirees who pay 30% of their income for rent. NYCHA's chair and CEO, Gregory RUSS, says major structural work and agency reorganization are urgently needed, but there is hope.
If we can't get what we need, we have the chance to raise what we need, and we can show residents that we're actually going to invest both in their units and in the reform of the organization.
We need a new narrative change in this country where we see public housing as essential, and we actually treat public housing like we treat any other form of infrastructure.
In an exclusive interview, Russ told me that making changes to the way NYCHA operates gives them access to a toolbox of existing federally funded programs. These long-term subsidies can provide the money needed to modernize the buildings and renovate apartments.
We need to make this investment because really, if we think about it, it's more than just a capital investment. This is a social investment. This is investment in the place that people live.
Case in point, the 1,088 units in the 40-building Betances houses in the Bronx. In our exclusive first look, we saw the new kitchens, new bathrooms, security features, and redesigned common areas, all made possible with a public-private partnership in just 2 years with no residents displaced. It's clearly a better way of life, says Resident Association President GISELLE GAVIN.
NYCHA had put us on hold for years upon years, and we were all living in dilapidated condition. And so we decided to take that chance. We were afraid, but we decided to take that chance because we had nothing to lose.
Some are calling it a promising start, but there are skeptics. The pressure is on NYCHA to keep its promises moving forward.
I am not giving up. I will keep holding them accountable, giving them the support they need from the City Council.
So where do things stand now? Let's find out from our panel. Joining us, Gregory RUSS. He is the chair and CEO of NYCHA. Greg, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me.
We appreciate it. Also with us is New York State Senator Brian Benjamin. He's a senior assistant majority leader. His district is in Harlem, where there are many NYCHA developments. Brian, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Also with us is City Council member VANESSA GIBSON from the Bronx. She's also been on the forefront of fighting for residents' rights in her district and citywide. VANESSA, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. And also joining us is Reginald BOWMAN. He's a resident leader and resident of the Seth Low houses in Brooklyn and is a NYCHA citywide resident leader. Reginald, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me on, Lisa.
Thank you so much. VANESSA, I'm going to start with you on this. Where do you see NYCHA at the present time?
So I see NYCHA in a really dire state in need of repair, of serious investment at all levels of government. I see patient, understanding tenants that have lived in NYCHA for their entire lives, raising their families. I see intergenerational families that are living in public housing, but I see the despair, I see the disrepair, I see the inequity in the system. I see so many residents that have really, really fought the good fight, that have remained firm, that really fought to make sure that their lives have been improved. And it's unacceptable that in this day and age, in 2021, we are still struggling for basic necessities, for elevators that work, for apartments that are clean and safe, and infrastructure that is invested in.
State Senator Brian Benjamin, give us a quick summary of where you see things with NYCHA, because the State Assembly is going to have to be making some big decisions coming up.
Sure, and that, I think the Assembly and the Senate, we're going to have to work on what the future looks like. And I know Chairman Russ has some ideas, which I'm happy to hear him speak about. But I want to pick up on where VANESSA left off. I mean, there is significant issues. When you talk about $40 billion of need, there's heat issues all the time, elevator, asbestos, lead. I mean, there are so much issues across the entire portfolio. And the real question is, how are we going to fix these issues when you have a federal government that has walked away from NYCHA, that has walked away from public housing? We have a state budget crisis. We have a city budget crisis with $15 billion in the hole in the state level. The city, correct me if I'm wrong, Vanessa, is $4 to $5 billion in the hole. We got $40 billion of need. How are we going to make this work? We have to figure it out. And obviously the state and the city has to prioritize NYCHA.
Chairman Russ, when we interviewed you in your office for the exclusive for Fox 5 News, I came away with a sense of there's different levels of problems. There's the triage, there's a state of emergency that City Council Member Gibson was talking about, where you have pipes breaking, you have heat going out, you have that type of thing. And then there's this long term of there's huge structural things that need to be changed, but there's just no money. So just give us a sense of what the structure is of the direction you see where we're at right now.
Well, I want to affirm a couple of things, because I agree with both the senator and the council member on what we have to do, and feel very much, I think, their observations that this is long overdue. This investment that we're talking about, really, we're at a time when we're compelled to make it. We must make it. And we understand the budget issues that have been framed. We're hopeful that a new administration could provide some relief, but we have no guarantees. So we have tried to come up with a set of ideas that would raise this money using the existing federal structures to tap into more subsidy, and then using that subsidy, the additional subsidy, to raise capital that we need to make these critical improvements.
All right, so you're looking at ways that basically can come up with the money with existing programs, so you don't have to wait 3 more years for new legislation to be passed and that type of thing going on. Is that correct?
That's pretty accurate, that we want to put in place a structure that could access additional money through a voucher program, and then use those additional funds to borrow to begin to make the repairs that are desperately needed.
Reginald Bowman, in terms of the residents, how are you feeling about where things are now? It's been very rough for residents this past year with the pandemic, going through that, and then now NYCHA is taking a very active role in trying the resident leaders in trying to get their residents vaccinated right in the developments themselves. What do you see going on where we're at right now from the ground?
Well, if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. Right now, this is my 40th year of resident leadership, and this is about my 17th plan to preserve or improve public housing. And I agree with the necessity, but right now, NYCHA's biggest problem is they need serious infrastructure and modernization management and repairs that could be accomplished with the current funding on a daily basis. And then there really needs to be a reworking of the ideas that are being presented now, so that some type of 21st century improvement will happen.
We'll have much more coming up. Stay with us. Greg, in terms of prioritizing the needs of residents, if Betances is what people want, what they see there, that adapted to their development, how does this break down? Like, how many apartments are eligible for that? How many other developments? Vanessa expressed concern about Edenwald houses being such a big development. Betances, I think, is about 40 buildings, so that was a pretty big one too, in all different locations.
Well, I think that we have previously identified about 62,000 units that would go through RAD Impact. And we need that capital. We need the capital income that program will raise. But I think, to Mr. Bowman's point earlier, that we have 110,000 additional units that also need investment of scale. And NYCHA has the largest portfolio in the country. We constitute, if we're successful in trying some of these ideas out, we would be the single largest investment in public housing ever made, going all the way back to the start of it at the New Deal. So I think we have an opportunity, if we can, to make that kind of investment portfolio wide, but it's going to take some work, no question. And we have to deal with we have to deal with NYCHA's past, which casts a long shadow over the conversations that we're having today, and show folks that we can make these units into the kind of unit that you'd be happy to come home to in the evening or whenever you're off your work.
Brian, the State Assembly is going to have to vote on this NYCHA's blueprint for change. Tell us how you understand that, or what you think are the questions and also possible benefits. Yeah,
so the Assembly, there's a bill in the Assembly, and I know that we're having conversations around who's going to carry it in the Senate as well. That's for the Public Housing Preservation Trust. I want to talk about something real quick, because one of the things that was going through my mind as I was listening to Brother Bowman and Sister Gibson is, in the midst of the fact that we have the needs presently, that keeps growing, right? So it's not as if somehow the 40 billion stands still. Right. Every year that we don't fix some of the issues,
that's right,
continue to get worse and worse and worse. And so
that's right.
Good point.
So we're almost like chasing our tail a little bit. And I think, we have to really sit down with the federal government and really have a Marshall Plan. We're going to really try to drive over the next 3 to 5 years the entire portfolio of needs.
I agree.
At the same time, because otherwise it's just, we're going to always be playing catch up. We're never going to fully get there. And it's just going to be this continuous conversation. And so for me, I think that has to be where the conversation is. Now, with that being said, I do think that the Public Housing Preservation Trust that the NYCHA is looking for can unlock some of these tenant protection vouchers, which can really help us to raise more money. I think that's got to be one of a number of solutions that gets us to the entire solution of NYCHA, period.
Lisa, one of the things that we talked about, and I have to get this off my chest, about 5 years ago, we talked about the necessity for there being, as you suggested, brother, the investment in public housing has to be something like a foundation or a trust. And the original idea that was put together by the federal government with the Jesse Gray Housing Act, which is really still the backbone of this, was that there was going to be a consistent investment in public housing as something that was an essential thing as a part of American way of life. So it's important for something like the trust to be invested in, but it has to be more or less something that is actually agreed to as an infrastructure, or I like to think of it as preserving public housing as a landmark, because it's an institutional thing that needs to be invested in on a regular basis. And Marshall Plan notwithstanding, if this isn't done, the physical buildings themselves will reach a point of legally being able to be condemned.
Vanessa, we're talking about a lot of programs and policies and things like that, but you're very hands-on in your district, and you're out there and you're responding personally a lot of times to residents' concerns. Just give us a sense of the emotional and psychological burden when you don't know whether or not you're going to have heat, when you don't know if you go in and you come home and everything is soaked from work and everything's soaked because there's a leak in the roof. The danger because the lights are out and you have to go walk under the scaffolding for like almost a block to get to your front door. Give us a sense of what kind of stress that is for residents.
It is stressful every day, and it's a challenge. You don't know what you're going to wake up to. Your elevator may not work. When you come home from work, your elevator may not be working. That's the reality of what so many residents and families deal with every day in NYCHA. And yes, I said we need a transformation, because the reality is that this situation is dire. We need short-term goals, immediate fixes. We have a huge issue with staffing and recruitment at the ground level. We have to make sure that basic necessities like trash being picked up are done. There's lighting, the key fobs work, the intercoms work. Those are basic things, but we also know long-term plans as well have to be addressed. I've said before that we have a problem on the ground with messaging. We're not getting the message to the leaders of NYCHA that we need to be on board. In order for RAD, PAC, and the blueprint to be successful, we have to have credible messengers that are not just NYCHA. and not just elected officials. The resident leaders, Mr. Bowman and others, need to be credible messengers to get the message across to residents, because as of right now, they're not convinced.
Greg, in terms of the budget thing, obviously, you know, I just look at it in terms of an individual. You want to try to save for the future, but, you know, when there's an emergency today, you got to put the money in right there. Are you moving forward on several tracks, like Reginald just said, at the same time? And to Vanessa's point about, you know, a roof caves in, can that get fixed right away?
Well, first of all, NYCHA has its obligations, and we have no intention of retreating from those. These obligations exist whether we get the capital plan or not. What's a struggle, of course, is the capital conditions. And I want to acknowledge, too, that we need to reform the organization. I think that's one of the things.
That's right.
Yes, that we have a requirement in the monitorship agreement to do just that. And if I look at the future, there's two investments that are required. The first is the capital investment in the unit, because that would change the profile of how we do our work in ways that could benefit residents over the long term, because we could redistribute the resources we have and do that in a smart way. And the second investment is in the institution. And that's required by the reorganization plan in the agreement that we signed with HUD and the Southern District. And that is going to be as important in its way in changing some of these fundamental difficulties as the capital would be if we got it to invest in the units. And those two tracks have to occur together, I think, if we're going to be successful.
Brian, what about that for your constituents in Harlem?
No, I think that's all very important. But it's hard for me to think about that without thinking about the source of funding. And I think one of the reasons why Reginald has talked a lot about the iterations over the years is because we never have received a significant amount of funding from someplace. And I know, very recently there were talks about an infrastructure plan out of Washington, D.C., $1 trillion. To me, roads, bridges, tunnels, highways, I think public housing needs to be included in that.
Right.
And
absolutely.
And we
absolutely, Senator.
Yeah, and we need to get a real allocation separate from housing support. We need infrastructure support. And when we talk about these numbers, and again, we don't have Trump in the White House anymore. We now have Biden, Harris. We have a senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, who's now the majority leader because of a lot of the work a lot of us have done to get him there. We've got leadership in the House. This has got to be part of the narrative. And I think if we can put that along with some of the great proposals that Greg Russ is looking to do, because his proposals notwithstanding, if he doesn't have the resources, he can't move quickly.
Can't do anything.
That's why I want you on our team.
Let me just get Vanessa in here. Vanessa, in terms of the narrative, because you emphasize heavily there has to be communication with the residents. Does there need to be a change in narrative too? Because there's still a certain stigma about the residents are being given this housing because it's publicly subsidized, when in fact the vast majority are working families or retired seniors.
Yes.
Yeah. And what about the narrative?
That's right.
Is that part of the communication with the residents as well, so that they feel invested in these changes?
Absolutely. I think that's a great start, and it will really show progress and demonstrate that NYCHA means what it says and says what it means. Because as Mr. Bowman said, there's a long history, and residents have been promised and promised repeatedly, and to no avail. They've not seen changes. They've not seen their quality of life increase and improve, and they're very concerned and worried. And yes, many of our leaders have taken visits to Matanzas, we went to Chicago. We've seen Ocean Bay out in the Far Rockaways. And so everyone has seen in real live what it could potentially look like. But I still think the uncertainty and the doubt, we have to fill that with confidence and show them a plan that they actually can believe in. As I said, it's great to do the exterior. We all want to look pretty on the outside, but I want you to look pretty on the inside too.
We really need to form out of this conversation. I would like to propose that we actually do present something to the New York State delegation, to Schumer and the rest of them, so that they understand that we are really serious about making sure that NYCHA as a institution is included in the infrastructure planning of this administration going forward.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers on NYCHA at a Turning Point. Watch it again on our Fox 5 NY YouTube page and share it with your family and friends. Remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace, love, and justice for all.